They called him a genius, but in his heart, Charlie Chaplin was just a broken man haunted by a pain no one could see. He was there to conduct, but what happened that night was a confrontation. A confrontation between his own hidden grief and the quiet suffering of a small, dying boy. For the first time, music wasn't about art, it was about healing a broken heart. London, 1952, the Royal Albert Hall. Every seat, all 18,000 of them, was filled to capacity. The crowd buzzed with a feverish anticipation, not for a film premiere, but for something more intimate. Charlie Chaplin, the composer, the conductor. He was there to lead a live orchestra, performing the sweeping scores from his films. On the surface, it was a triumph, a victory lap for a man who had conquered every medium. But beneath the spotlight, something was terribly wrong. He had lost something, someone, a piece of himself that the world never knew existed. And with that loss, the music, the very soul of his art, had gone silent inside him. He was a conductor of ghosts, a maestro of nothingness. Hidden beneath the stage, in the dusty, forgotten corners where the real work was done, lived Agnes. She was not part of the audience. She was a cleaner, an old woman with gnarled hands and a quiet, almost invisible presence. For years, she had swept up the debris of greatness, a silent witness to the spectacle above. Agnes was also blind, a condition that had sharpened her other senses to an almost supernatural degree. She heard things others missed, the subtle shifts in the acoustics, the hidden emotions in a musician's breath. And tonight, she heard something impossible. A soft, raspy cough, followed by a faint whisper of a child's song, coming from somewhere in the cavernous hall. It was a sound of profound frailty, of a life at its very end. But then the orchestra began. Chaplin raised his baton, and the first notes of limelight filled the air. A melody of hope and melancholy, a symphony of a life lived. As the music swelled, Agnes heard something else, a gasp of relief, a fragile sigh from the same corner where she heard the cough. The child's song, that whisper of despair, had been silenced, replaced by a sound of pure, unadulterated peace. She heard the music doing what no medicine could. Chaplin's art, this soulless performance from a broken man, was somehow mending another broken soul. Chaplin, lost in his mechanical conducting, was oblivious. The crowd was spellbound. But Agnes, the blind cleaner, saw the truth with her ears. The maestro on stage was a shadow of his former self, but the music he commanded still held a forgotten power. It wasn't about the grand performance, it was about the small, invisible moments. It made her wonder, how often do we miss the most? And profound truths because we are too focused on the grand spectacle. If you want to know what happened next, what secret Chaplin was hiding, and how it all came undone, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The story is just getting started, and you don't want to miss a single note. The music reached its crescendo, the final soaring notes hanging in the air. The crowd erupted, a deafening wave of applause and cheers. Chaplin lowered his baton, the mask of a smile firmly in place. He bowed, a practiced, empty gesture, but just as the audience began to quiet, something happened. The music, the entire orchestra, stopped. Abruptly. Dead silence. Chaplin's jaw tightened. He turned, his face a mask of furious confusion, searching for the source of the error. A musician with a panicked look, a string section frozen mid-bow. Then he saw her. Agnes, the cleaner, had shuffled onto the stage, her presence a jarring, almost offensive disruption to the perfection of the moment. She wasn't supposed to be seen. She was part of the machinery, the invisible force that made the magic happen. "Madam," Chaplin hissed, his voice cutting through the silence, "what is the meaning of this? You are interrupting a performance." Agnes didn't flinch. Her blind eyes seemed to look right through him, into the emptiness he was trying so hard to hide. She spoke, her voice a low, steady whisper that somehow carried through the massive hall. "The meaning is that your music is not yours anymore, Mr. Chaplin. It belongs to someone who needs it more." The crowd began to murmur. They didn't understand. This wasn't part of the show. "Nonsense," Chaplin retorted, his logic-driven mind trying to regain control. "My music is for all of them, for 18,000 people. It is a work of art." "It is a work of grief," Agnes countered, her wisdom simple and profound. "You play it because it is what you know, not what you feel. But there is a child here, a boy, and for him your music, it is a bridge to a moment of peace." She gestured with a trembling hand towards a shadowed box in the upper balcony, a place reserved for special guests. Chaplin followed her gaze. Tucked away, almost invisible, was a small, frail figure. A boy, no older than 7, his face pale and thin, propped up in a chair, a blanket pulled tight around him. He looked like a miniature ghost, but his eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on the stage. He was the one Agnes had heard. Chaplin's fury began to crack, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. He was a man who lived in a world of grand gestures, of theatricality and artifice. This reality, this quiet, painful truth, was a foreign language. To him, "He is dying, sir," Agnes said, her voice softer now, a plea. "The doctors have done what they can, but they cannot heal what ails his spirit. But your music, for a moment, it took away the pain." Chaplin stood on the stage, a man caught between two worlds. The world of his fame, his power, his controlled performance, and this new, terrifying world of raw, unfiltered human suffering. He had a choice to make: return to his performance, ignore the small, fragile life in the shadows, or give up everything he had built for a single, impossible moment of grace. The crowd watched, their murmurs silenced by a growing sense of awe. The king of comedy was no longer a performer. He was a man, exposed and vulnerable. This is a story about the true meaning of art and the power of human connection. The best is yet to come. The silence in the hall was deafening. Every one of the 18,000 people was watching. They had come for a concert, for a show, but now they were witnessing a deeply private and profound confrontation. Chaplin's face was a study in internal warfare. His logical mind, the part of him that built empires and calculated every frame of a film, was fighting against a wave of raw, emotional truth. He was a man who had mastered the art of faking emotion, of putting on a face for the world. But Agnes, the blind cleaner, had somehow stripped it all away. He looked at the boy again. The child's eyes were like two pools of quiet suffering, a mirror of the very same pain that had been consuming Chaplin since his own recent private tragedy. The boy's frailty was a visceral, undeniable force that demanded more than a polished performance. It demanded humanity. "It is a life, Mr. Chaplin," Agnes said, her voice a gentle, insistent pressure. "It is a life that is slipping away." "What is a performance in the face of that?" Chaplin's pride was a fortress, and Agnes was battering it down with the simplest weapon: empathy. He saw the dilemma clearly. He could stand his ground, assert his authority, and dismiss her as a madwoman. He could finish the concert, earn the applause, and go home to his mansion, his wealth, his loneliness. It would be the safe, logical choice, the painful choice. Or he could listen to this invisible woman, this beacon of simple wisdom, and risk everything. He would be seen not as a legend, but as a fool, a sentimental old man who had been manipulated by a cleaner. He would be giving up his armor, his carefully constructed persona. The crowd's murmurs began to change, no longer confused but expectant. They were sensing a turning point, a moral pivot. This was no longer a story about a conductor. It was a story about a soul. Chaplin took a shaky breath. His hand, the one that had commanded orchestras and directed actors, fell to his side. The baton, the symbol of his power, dangled uselessly. He had to decide, would he continue to live in a world of controlled sorrow, or would he dare to embrace the painful, messy, beautiful chaos of true human connection? The weight of 18,000 eyes was on him. The ghost of his own private grief was whispering in his ear. And Agnes, the quiet oracle, stood before him, a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he could still gain. The decision was made, not with a word, but with a gesture. Charlie Chaplin, the man who had conducted empires, dropped his baton. It clattered against the stage, a small but powerful sound in the cavernous silence. He knelt, not in defeat, but in submission to a truth greater than himself. He turned to the orchestra, his voice now devoid of its previous fury, a raw and honest plea. "Everyone," he said, his voice cracking, "please, quiet." The musicians, sensing the shift, lowered their instruments. Chaplin then turned to Agnes. "What must I do?" he asked, a question he hadn't asked anyone in decades. Agnes, with a serene certainty, pointed to a single violin, resting on a stand near the edge of the stage. "Play for him," she said, "not for them, for him." Chaplin picked up the violin. He was an accomplished musician, but this wasn't about a performance. This was about a confession. He stood alone on the grand stage, with a single spotlight illuminating him and the violin. He closed his eyes, and instead of seeing the 18,000 expectant faces, he saw the small, fragile figure in the balcony. He saw his own grief, his own loss, mirrored in the boy's suffering. He began to play, not a soaring, orchestral piece, but something simple, pure, and heartbroken, the melody of a lullaby, one he remembered from his own childhood of poverty and pain. The notes were fragile, hesitant, each one a tear he was finally allowing himself to shed. He wasn't performing. He was grieving. He was connecting his own sorrow to the boy's. The music was not a show. It was a bridge. As he played, something extraordinary happened. The boy, who had been lying still, began to stir. He lifted his head. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He was listening. The music was a balm. Chaplin's vision of himself began to shatter and reform in that single profound moment. For so long he had believed his power lay in his ability to control, to command the masses, to orchestrate perfection. But here, on this stage, he understood the real magic. It wasn't in the grand gestures, but in the small, intimate connections. His genius wasn't in making the world laugh, but in sharing a single, honest moment of vulnerability with one soul. The fame, the wealth, the power, It all meant nothing compared to the simple, raw beauty of a human heart reaching out to another. When the final note of the simple lullaby faded into the silence of the hall, Chaplin did not open his eyes. He stood there, transformed, the music still echoing within him. The 18,000 people were not applauding. They were weeping. They weren't crying for the music or the performance. They were crying for the humanity of it all. They had witnessed a miracle. A genius who had lost his way had found his soul, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Chaplin finally lowered the violin and opened his eyes. He looked at the boy in the balcony. The child looked back, a silent communion passing between them. Then the boy did something that no one, not even the doctors, had thought possible. He lifted a hand and waved. A small, simple gesture of life and hope. Chaplin, the master of silent emotion, did not speak a word. He simply bowed his head, not to the crowd, but to the boy and to Agnes, the blind cleaner who had opened his eyes. He had come to the Royal Albert Hall a broken maestro, a man haunted by grief. He left a healed human being, his purpose no longer to command an audience, but to connect with a single, fragile heart. The story of the maestro's greatest performance was never written in the newspapers. It wasn't a film or a play. It was a secret shared between a man, a boy, and an invisible woman, who showed him that true art is not about perfection, but about compassion. It's about the silent moments when a single note can heal a heart, and a simple act of kindness can change the world. So what part of this story touched you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you can be a part of the next chapter of this incredible journey into the untold secrets of history's greatest legends.